Welcome. Today we're going to be taking apart a Razer Blade Pro RZ09 series gaming laptop. And this particular model is a 01171E51. So to begin, we're just going to need a T6 Torx. And on the bottom here, these little screws have little plastic kind of covers on them. So just push the T6 right through them and it'll grab into the screw and allow you to remove it. Alright, once you get those screws out, these two screws right here kind of threw me for a loop because once you push the bit in, it feels like you stripped them, but these aren't actually screws. They're just little plastic divots or something that they also covered with one of those little stickers for whatever reason. Okay, so now we're gonna find the seam where the bottom case meets the palm rest, and we're just gonna get in there and start popping it up. Sometimes it's easier to just start from the back where it kind of meets the hinge, and if that vent slopes in, then you can kind of get your fingers in there and get a good grip on it. And we'll just pop it up all the way around. Alright, now that we have the case cracked open, we'll go ahead and start disassembling the inside, starting from the easiest to the hardest. So the first thing we can get right there is the small Wi-Fi card, it looks like. And just about all the rest of the fasteners are a Phillips 2.5, but the one for the Wi-Fi card looks a lot smaller. It looks like it's about a 1.5, so you'll need a couple small Phillips bits to go ahead from here. I'm going to put on my electrostatic bracelet just to try to make sure we don't harm any electronics on the inside here. Alright, so once you get that fastener out, you can kind of wiggle that Wi-Fi card out. You might need to use something to pull in that little loop there to let you get some leverage. And then once you pull it out, you can pop those Wi-Fi antennas off and replace the card. Alright, so it looks like the hard drive caddy is just some rubber strips, so we'll go ahead and just gently pull that hard drive up and just kind of wiggle that SATA connector back and forth until you can release the hard drive. And I believe the battery is kind of glued to the palm rest in this model. So we're going to go ahead and kind of leave that one for one of the later steps. And we can go ahead and also remove the in-out board right here. Careful when you're pulling the tape back, because sometimes you can kind of partially rip a ribbon open or something. So just try to kind of hold it with your finger when you're pulling it back and make sure you don't tug on anything too fragile. Alright, for this type of connector, we're just going to pop it up with our fingernail. And just start from whatever side is easiest. And I'll remove a little more tape. And we have a couple more connectors here on the bottom of the motherboard. Let's see if they come out easy or not. Definitely might help to have a spudger or some other tool to kind of push or pry on things while you're down here. So with this type of connector, they don't really give you anything to hold on to, so we're just gonna remove the board, and then for now we'll just pull the connectors out of the NL board. Yeah, those things are pretty in there. That's a long connector, so sometimes they can be tough getting out. Just make sure to wiggle. Alright, looks like we have another small screw for the SSD. So I'll switch back to that 1.5 to remove the screw. And just pull it out of the connector. Alright, so we'll go ahead and just kind of free up any cords, ribbons, antennas, anything we see stuck to the motherboard. So I believe that's what we'll be removing next, along with the fan, or just the heatsink. Looks like the fan and the heatsink aren't connected in this model. Alright, so this little tiny connector, we're going to need the spudger, unless you have really narrow fingers. Just kind of wiggle that out. And then another small type connector for this one. Definitely need to pull up on the ribbon and unstick it from the motherboard first, otherwise you will not be able to easily get that connector to slide out. Alright, so careful at the very end, and then we can go ahead and try to wiggle that connector out. Alright, another flip up type connector, and flip it back down. Go ahead and get the tape up and off. So for the small cable, it's just a pull out connector, real small, so yeah, you definitely need some fingernails or a tool for that one. And then for the, looks like the display, it gives you a little handy ribbon to pull up, but I would always put a finger kind of next to the connector just to help brace the motherboard against pulling up. Sometimes those connectors can really pull before they actually disconnect. Alright, so we'll unstick that, and alright, so it looks like we have one more for the, no, that might be the fan. Pop that connector, and one more over here. And just use our fingernails to pull that one. Alright, so it looks like we've got everything except for the large connector for the battery. And similar to the in-out board, I'm just going to disconnect that one after we've released the motherboard. And we'll see if I can get a better grip on it from the other side. So let's remove the screws for the motherboard. Alright, now we got those screws out, we'll go ahead and just give the motherboard a gentle wiggle just to see if it's nice and loose. There's a little bit of tape here at the bottom, so it might feel like it's still stuck to something, but as long as you make sure you got those screws out, then you can safely kind of wiggle it free. And always lift up slowly just to make sure they haven't snuck some extra ribbons or something to the bottom. So it looks like we're good, and we just need to get this connector out. And another long one, pretty tough. Okay, so looks like the RAM upgrade is not easy on this particular model. So here at the bottom of your motherboard is going to be your RAM and your heat sinks. To remove the heat sink, you just have the 4 screws for each one, and when you reinstall with new thermal paste, there's a number stamped here on both, indicating the tightening order so that you squeeze down on that thermal paste evenly. So it looks like we got the motherboard out, and we can inspect the rest of the palm rest. Alright, so now we can go ahead and start removing the rest of the components on the palm rest, starting with the fans. So just remove the remaining screws, and these fans are pretty dusty, but they're not too clogged. One thing that you can tend to see on some of these laptops that have come in with bad motherboards is a real big hair clog or dust bunnies or something between the fan and the heat sink, or caught in the fan. So that's bad news, especially if you have a high-end laptop, because the overheating will kill your motherboard and or your video card. So always just spray some kind of compressed air into your laptop through the little back vent or side vent, once every month or two, and you should be fine. Alright, so now we can go ahead and start removing the other components. The display can be separated, just 4 screws on each hinge. Make sure you open it up before you remove those screws, otherwise you probably won't be able to slide the palm rest out without having to pull up the hinges manually. I think we're going to do it that way. Since the hinges are easy to get to, we can just remove the screws and then flip up the hinges and separate the two. So it's at this point, if you need to remove your display, that's how you do it. It's pretty easy. But for now, we're just going to go ahead and remove the touchpad module and power button, and then the whatever that is, speakers, or and then the battery we're going to go ahead and leave with the palm rest. So for these type of ribbons, the little tabs at the top that kind of stick out, you're going to just slide that little plastic piece out a ways. So it just kind of pops out laterally, and then you can remove the ribbon, and then it's a good idea to try to push it back in. So just repeat for all of those ribbons. This little one here is going to stay, and then we're going to use a smaller size Phillips bit, the 1.5, and remove these smaller Phillips screws. there's a couple hiding under the ribbons as well. Alright, so now that we've removed those screws, just make sure we have everything clear, and then we'll just go ahead and wiggle that up and out of the palm rest assembly. Alright, the keyboard we're going to leave in place, but you can see there's just a few Phillips head screws kind of working its way around. There is a little bit of metal that goes underneath the battery, but I'm thinking once you have those screws kind of tilted up, you might be able to pull that keyboard out. But either way, it shouldn't be too hard because it's basically just attached with a few more Phillips screws and maybe prying up some adhesive for the battery to get it out. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and remove those hinge screws and separate the display assembly from the palm rest assembly. I think I will switch back to my 2.5 for these hinge screws just to keep from stripping them. Alright, so if you can get a grip with your fingers underneath these hinges, some are going to be easier than others. If the laptop hasn't been opened and closed very often, they'll be pretty tight, but if it's well used, it shouldn't be any problem to flip up those hinges to clear the palm rest. So it doesn't look like the looks like there might be something else. No. So you'll just have to kind of turn, once you have those hinges open, just kind of open the palm rest up, kind of following it, because there's little kind of half circles here in the palm rest need to clear around the hinge bar. So, and that's probably how you're going to have to reinstall it, is just pushing that totally onto the hinge and then kind of closing it as an assembly. And then it looks like there's just a few small screws also to get that power button off. But for the most part, the palm rest assembly is disassembled. Not too crazy, but it's not the easiest laptop to take apart, but as long as you're patient, you don't kind of jerk on anything too hard or too much of a hurry, it's totally doable. Alright, so we have the LCD display here. We're going to go ahead and just kind of probe this bezel. Most of the older laptops that don't have a full glass bezel are pretty easy worked on and separated just by pulling the bezel up and around, and that'll pop it off, and then you'll have access to everything in the display assembly. But some models, especially the higher end ones, will definitely use copious amounts of adhesive. So sometimes it's just more worth it to try to buy your display assembly complete instead of trying to, you know, work that bezel off and replace it and then try to get everything back together. So this one, it's very, very hard to even pull on the inner part of the bezel. So I'm going to say this one is pretty heavily glued. What you might need to do let's see. I'm gonna grab the spudger. And there is a seam that goes along the top. The only problem is it's totally surrounded with rubber, so it's yeah, I can hear it. I can hear the adhesive behind the bezel just like kind of cricking and cracking as I'm trying to pry up on it. So it's definitely not going to be an easy display to take apart. So we're probably just going to go ahead and leave this one whole. And if you do own a Razer blade of this model that needs a LCD screen, I would definitely recommend buying it as an assembly, unless you have a good set of heat gun and some working tools to, you know, get in there and separate the pieces. But it's probably going to be a total pain. All right, finishing up with the motherboard. If you need to remove your memory, you just spread the little retainer bars there. It'll make your memory stick pop up, and then you just pull it out of the connector. For your hard drive SATA connector, it's not removable until you remove the motherboard, because this is the bottom side of the motherboard here. So you're going to want to put a finger right next to it and then just pull straight up on that connector. You definitely want to brace it with a finger though, because you can see it's just a little fin of plastic that's holding that on there. Alright, now we'll go ahead and remove those 8 heatsink screws and remove the heat sinks from the CPU and GPU. And like I said before, you can remove these screws in any order you want, but putting them back on, you want to do it in like a Z pattern. And they are numbered there in case you would rather use the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4. Alright, so if your thermal paste is nice and new, these are going to come off no problem. If it's been there, if your model's pretty old, at least a few years old, the thermal paste tends to harden, so you might have to kind of wiggle that heatsink to get it off. Alright, so this little piece right here, it's kind of a quasi heatsink. It looks like there's a thermal pad in between this. It looks like maybe to help cool the chipset. So just leave that piece of tape there, because it's probably quasi important to cooling the motherboard. So, and then we'll pull those out and reattach them to the in-out board. And that's basically it. The laptop was not too hard to disassemble, but it does take a little bit of patience. So that's how you disassemble a Razer Blade Pro RZ09 series. And again, this model was the 0117 1E51. So if you found the video informative or you liked it, please like and subscribe. Thank you.